Thank you, everybody, for coming to the Aaron Torres Podcast YouTube page. I do have one quick favor before we get to the video that you came here for, and that is very simply this. You see that little red subscribe button below this video? Go ahead, smash that subscribe button. It really does help me. It really does help this channel grow and my audience grow. So go ahead and hit that red subscribe button. And now, here is the video that you came here for. All right, let's talk a little NFL draft because we are now, about 36 or so hours away from the NFL draft. I'm recording here about midday on Wednesday, and there is one topic that above all other topics seems to be basically all anyone wants to talk about when it comes to the draft, and it is what the heck are the San Francisco 49ers going to do at number 3? They trade up about a month and a half ago, get into the third spot. It's clear they're going to eventually move off of Jimmy Garoppolo. At the time, I think everybody kind of assumed it was going to be Justin Fields. Then there's this narrative that it's going to be Mac Jones. He is the betting favorite in Vegas. For a minute, I was actually in Vegas about 2 weeks ago, and Justin Fields was again established as the favorite. Then it went back to Mac Jones, and now there is this conversation coming out of San Francisco where it appears as though the 49ers are down to either Mac Jones or Trey Lance at number 3. And so what I want to do over the next few minutes is talk about this pick, but talk about this conversation that has come up over the last 2-3 weeks when it became apparent that Mac Jones really might go number 3 overall, and that is this. How could you possibly take Mac Jones at number 3 overall? That has been the conversation, right? Mac Jones kind of has continually risen up draft boards since the end of the season, and one conversation above all else as it pertains to the 49ers at number 3 is like, how could they possibly take Mac Jones? It's franchise suicide. They'll never win with him. How can you possibly take him over Justin Fields or Trey Lance or whatever? And so I want to get into that. Because what I will say is while Justin Fields would personally be my pick if I was the 49ers, heck, he'd be my pick if I was the Jets, I don't understand why it seems so crazy that Mac Jones, who just set all sorts of college football passing records against one of the toughest schedules in the history of college football, could go number 3 overall. So first of all, to backtrack, like I said, I just want to make it abundantly clear so there's no confusion. If I was the San Francisco 49ers, I would take Justin Fields. And I'll take it a step further. If I was the New York Jets, I would take Justin Fields. I do not understand why it has become such a foregone conclusion that Zach Wilson is the best quarterback in the draft when he has kind of a smaller sample size of success than Justin Fields, a smaller sample size of success. The teams that he played certainly weren't as good as Justin Fields or Mac Jones. So I think a much more interesting conversation is why is Zach Wilson the definitive number 2 pick as opposed to why is Mac Jones the definitive number 3 pick. But since Zach Wilson is going to go almost assuredly to the New York Jets, let's talk about this Mac Jones conversation because it seems as though the reason that people are frustrated about the idea of Mac Jones going number 3 overall is for 2 specific reasons. The first one, well, he was a mid to late first-round pick when the season ended. No games have been played, so how can he move up draft boards when he hasn't done anything since the season ended? That's the first thing. And then the second thing is, he played at Bama. Anybody could do what he did at Bama, so why would you take him this high in the draft? So first of all, the first conversation, he hasn't played since January. What has changed? That is the single dumbest conversation in the history of sports, and let me tell you why. The reason that he is rapidly moving up draft boards is very, very, very simple. The people that actually make decisions in the draft, the GMs, the coaches, the front office people, you know what they're doing during the college football season? They're focused on their actual team. You think the Cincinnati Bengals GM, Zach Taylor, their head coach, think he's breaking down film of cornerbacks from Boise State or offensive guards from Northwestern in October? No, they're getting ready to play the Steelers and the Ravens. And so the idea that Mac Jones has risen up draft boards isn't inconceivable when you remember the fact that most of the guys who are going to make decisions on draft night were not paying attention during college football season. Then their season ended, they flipped on the tape, and they said, oh my goodness, this guy just finished a season where he completed 78% of his passes, 41 touchdowns, 4 interceptions against one of the toughest schedules in college football. We should probably look into this guy more. Not saying we have to take him, but he's probably at least worth looking into. And then there's also this idea of, Mac Jones plays at Alabama. Anybody could do what Mac Jones did. Really? Because you know what Mac Jones did this season? He completed 78% of his passes, 77.8% to be exact. That is quite literally, this isn't figurative. Sometimes I say literally, and it isn't literal. This is literally the highest completion percentage in the history of college football. So the idea that anyone could do what Mac Jones did is factually incorrect because no one in the history of college football, doesn't matter how many NFL caliber wide receivers, not Tua with all those receivers last year, not Joe Burrow with all his wide receivers, not Ken Dorsey when he was throwing to Santana Moss, Andre Johnson, and Reggie Wayne, not Matt Leinart. No one in the history of college football has ever done what Mac Jones has done last season. So don't tell me anyone could do what Mac Jones did because literally nobody has done it. And so when you think about it, and when you think about the idea of why he's moving up, it actually makes perfect sense to me. These GMs turn on tape, these coaches turn on tape for the first time. They're like, man, this guy is really, really, really good. And so the idea that he's moving up draft boards makes perfect sense. Beyond that, let's have a bigger picture conversation about why it is absolutely not inconceivable that Mac Jones is moving up draft boards or that he could go number 3 overall. And let's just use our brains, okay? If we want to use anyone could have done what Mac Jones did because it was Alabama and he had all this talent, well, all we got to do is go back a year. All we got to do is go back to last year when Tua Tagovailoa was the proverbial definitive number 1 pick overall through about midway through the college football season. Joe Burrow blows up. Joe Burrow surpasses him. And then Tua, of course, gets hit with a knee injury, immediately followed by a hip injury. And all of a sudden, Tua is no longer the number 1 overall pick. But what Tua remains is a top 5 pick, and Tua went number 5 overall on draft night. Nobody thought it was crazy. Nobody thought it was inconceivable. And really, when you look back on it, forget what Tua did on the field with the Dolphins. When you just look back on the idea that Tua a year ago, we really didn't know if he was going to be able to play this year or how much and how good was the hip, and nobody could really test him because of COVID. Nobody could get in the facility to work him out. Like, the idea that he went number 5 overall is kind of crazy in hindsight. We forget it, but it isn't. But let's just use Tua. Because when he went number 5, nobody was like flipping over tables and yelling and screaming, this is the craziest thing ever. And here are the facts on Tua. First of all, one, there was the hip thing, which was like a real thing. Like he shattered his hip and we did not know if he was going to play football again. 2, I hate to say it, he played against an easier schedule than Mac Jones did this year. Never forget. Mac Jones, Alabama did not play Western Carolina or Coastal Carolina or Navy or Army or New Mexico State or whoever Tua played early in the season. Mac Jones played against an SEC-only schedule, and then he goes to the SEC championship game, plays Florida. Goes to the semifinals, plays Notre Dame. Goes to the championship, plays Ohio State. That was who Mac Jones played against. 8 SEC teams in the regular season, or was it 10? I take that back. 10 SEC teams in the regular season when Tua only played 8. Florida in the SEC championship game, Notre Dame, and Ohio State. On top of that, Tua basically put up worse or equal stats to what Mac Jones did. They both had an 11-to-1% completion, 11-to-1 touchdown to interception ratio, They both completed about 11 yards per completion. Tua a significantly lower completion percentage, and Tua did it with much better talent around him. Never forget, Tua had Henry Ruggs and Jerry Jeudy, who were both first-round picks last year, in addition to Jalen Waddle, in addition to Devontae Smith. Mac Jones basically had Devontae Smith, and that was it. Because Jerry Jeudy, Henry Ruggs go pro. Jalen Waddle gets hurt in like the 4th game of the season, and Mac Jones basically has one guy to throw to deep, and that's Devontae Smith. So let's just kind of use our brains and be smart and think out loud here. And let's just think about Tua. Tua went number 5 overall. Nobody freaked out. Nobody complained. Nobody claimed it was racism or it was this or it was that. Tua goes number 5 overall off of a shattered hip when he had worse stats against worse competition with better players around him than Mac Jones did. But it's crazy that we're going to take Mac Jones at number 3. It wasn't crazy when we took Tua at number 5. How about this? How about Joe Burrow? 24 years old, 5th-year senior. Great year last year for Joe Burrow. I'm not going to tear down Joe Burrow. I loved watching him play. I love watching him play in Cincinnati. I thought he was awesome. But let's not forget, Joe Burrow at LSU, you know who he threw to? Jamar Chase, who won the Biletnikoff, is the best wide receiver in college football. Justin Jefferson, who was maybe the best wide receiver in last year's draft. Terrace Marshall, who might be a first-round pick this year. He had Clyde Edwards-Helaire, was the best running back in college football last year, eventual number 1 overall pick. Or no, first-round pick, excuse me. So Joe Burrow goes number 1 overall with 3 first-round talents at wide receiver, including the best wide receiver in college football, no different than Mac Jones. And nobody complained. Nobody freaked out. Nobody claimed it was this egregious, unspeakable pick. But Mac Jones is crazy because he had Devontae Smith, and oh my God, anyone could do what he did with Devontae Smith. Well, first of all, again, nobody did what he did this season in the history of college football, but it wasn't crazy for Tua last year. It wasn't crazy for Joe Burrow. So why is it crazy for Mac Jones? So I'm going to stop yelling and screaming. I'm going to stop getting worked up, but I just want to give this kid credit. He literally did what no one else in college football has ever done, and I am not going to get worked up if he goes number 3 overall. Now look, if he goes number 10, if he goes number 15, if he goes number 5, whatever. For the record, I would take Justin Fields at number 2. I would take Justin Fields if I was San Francisco. But let's stop freaking out if Mac Jones ends up going number 3 overall to San Francisco. If you guys enjoyed this video, please make sure to subscribe to this YouTube page. Hit the red button so all the new videos pop up every time you log in. Also, make sure to follow me on Instagram at Aaron Torres Pod and on Twitter at Aaron_Torres. We'll be back. Oh, and find episodes of the Aaron Torres Podcast on iTunes or your favorite podcast provider.